Hey everybody, this is Tim of the University of Vinyl, back today with number 8 in my series of videos highlighting, focusing on an individual mastering engineer and let's say some standout titles that they have mastered over the years. Today we're going to be looking at the career of Lee Hulko. Lee Hulko was the co-founder of Sterling Sound. He co-founded that business in 1968 in New York, and he went on to run Sterling Sound in one way or one fashion or another from 1968 all the way up to 1998. So 30-year run at Sterling Sound. Lee Hulko was responsible for, in the early days of Sterling Sound, bringing in some heavy hitters as far as mastering engineers were concerned. First of all, he hired Bob Ludwig shortly after he formed the business. Of course, we all know Bob Ludwig. Check out my most recent video on Bob and some great albums that he's responsible for mastering. And then he also brought in another person I featured in the past, George Mariano. George Mariano, a legendary mastering engineer, sadly died of cancer about 10 years ago now. But I have a whole video and I have a new playlist. If you haven't seen it yet, check it out. It has all of these series of videos that I've been doing over the last couple months or so. Lee Hulko, when he started Sterling Sound in 1968 on the East Coast, he was almost in parallel with Doug Sachs, who had started the mastering lab along with his brother on the West Coast. So both of those individuals were pivotal players as far as kind of the new emerging technologies and philosophies, groupthink about how do we master albums, in the late 60s moving forward. And Lee Hulko was very, very prolific from 1968 all the way up until the late 70s on vinyl. There are some key titles that he's responsible for. And Lee Hulko is known for what we call a transparent mix or a transparent soundscape. So things are very detailed. If you have a decent setup, you're going to be able to hear really good separation of the instruments. Between the two channels, there is good separation. So he may feature a lead guitar solo on one channel, rhythm guitar on the other channel. Things are typically mastered nice and loud. So he's another engineer that would basically push things close to the limit, but still allowing for no distortion and as little compression as possible. Basically what all that adds up to is a very, very pleasing sound to the human ear. Today I'm going to focus on 5 key Lee Hulko titles that were released between the years of 1970 all the way up to 1976. So we're looking at a 6-year span, and I'm going to feature 5 albums today, so let's get started. The first album I'm going to highlight is one of those benchmark albums that audiophiles point to as a fantastic way to test out a new stereo system, maybe show off to a naysayer, things like that. And in 1970, Lee Hulko mastered an album coming out from a singer-songwriter based in the UK going by the name of Cat Stevens. And of course, I'm talking about T for the Tillerman. This is just a standout album. It sounds amazing. Not only does Cat Stevens have hit after recognizable song on this, but the mastering is sublime. So it's mastered loud in places. There will be a second or a third verse where Cat comes in with drums, additional guitar layers, and you really feel it in your listening room on your speakers. And just an incredible soundstage. Right off the bat on side one, we have a trifecta of songs that are iconic Cat Stevens songs, and they sound amazing. Of course, I'm talking about Where Did the Children Play? So, this is kind of an early look at environmentalism, and the song has got an incredible lyric, really nice mix of acoustic guitars, starting off along with a harmonium, I believe, on that song. Hard-Headed Woman, track 2. Track 3, Wild World. A pretty good, out-of-the-gate 3-song extravaganza. And the pressing that I have is a very early A&M Records tan label. And the nice thing about this pressing is it is dead quiet. It's basically near mint. Did I say it sounds amazing? I think I already said that. There are people out there in the audiophile vinyl community who will say that the Pink Island label from the UK beats all others, but I don't know about that. I know that this that I have in my hand sounds incredible. This is a 1970 US first press on that tan A&M label. That's T for the Tillerman, Cat Stevens, released in 1970, mastered by Lee Hulko at Sterling Sound. Before we go farther, just want to point out that it's super easy to find or determine if you have a Lee Hulko mastered copy of an album. There's always going to be, in the early days, Sterling would be etched in the dead wax. Later it was stamped. And then you have a very nice, clean, precise LH for Lee Hulko that would typically be etched. I have seen a couple stamps in the later days. But typically you're going to see LH etched in the dead wax immediately following that Sterling stamp. In 1973, Paul Simon had moved well beyond his pairing with Simon and Garfunkel and put out a fantastic album that was actually, most of this album was recorded down in Alabama at the Muscle Shoals facility. So you had all of the Muscle Shoals rhythm section and players on this album, on almost every song. And there is an eclectic mix of songs on this album. I'm talking about There Goes Ryman Simon. There's that kind of iconic cover. This was done by Milton Glasser. Milton Glasser passed away very recently. Used to be with New York Magazine for years. He actually came up with the I Love New York logo, so he's kind of famous for that. This is a nice gatefold. We've got a full set of lyrics for all the songs. And I am lucky to have a pretty dead quiet album here. But let's talk about some of the songs on this album. So we've got American Tune, kind of a very kind of forlorn, looking at America, Paul Simon kind of being alone situation, great acoustic guitar. One Man's Ceiling is Another Man's Floor. Really nice kind of shuffle going on in that song. Big hit off of this album was Kodachrome. It's listed there on the cover. Loves Me Like a Rock. Was a Sunny Day. So there's a little bit of ska, there's a little bit of reggae on this album as well. St. Judy's Comet is a fantastic song. This thing is, wait for that cliche, a tour de force, right? And I love the way, so he has on all of these songs a listing of who played what, who did what on that particular song. Let's take a look at Kodachrome. Electric guitar, Jimmy Johnson. Bass, David Hood. Drums, Roger Hawkins. Those are all the Muscle Shoals legendary players on that. Keyboard, Barry Beckett as well. Engineered by Jerry Masters and Phil Ramone. Recorded at Muscle Shoals Sound Studios, Muscle Shoals, Alabama. That is 1973. Mastered by Lee Hulko. There goes Ryman Simon. In 1973, Joe Walsh came out with an album that was actually credited as a solo album to Joe, but those in the know that this is a Barnstorm album. Barnstorm was a power trio that Joe Walsh put together after he left the James Gang. And the other two players involved are the great Joe Vitale. Joe Vitale is a drummer. On this particular album I'm going to show in just a moment, he plays flute, he plays synthesizer, other keyboards as well. He sings lead vocal on at least one song. And then the third part of the equation of Barnstorm, great bass player Kenny Passarelli. So Joe Walsh, left James Gang, settled in Colorado outside of Denver. He did a bunch of recording at the Netherland Ranch, which is up near Netherland, Colorado. It's still there. The facility is no longer a recording studio. They had a fire, but basically everything was, for the most part, saved up there. And you can actually kind of tour and walk the extensive property that they have up there. But pretty cool. Recently in 2017, I think it was 2017, me being in Colorado, I kind of know this stuff. Barnstorm was inaugurated into the Colorado Rock and Roll Hall of Fame along with the Netherland Ranch. So Netherland Ranch, legendary recording studio, tons of people recorded stuff up there. Most famous, Rock of the Westies, Elton John album. Chicago did a bunch of stuff up there. Styx recorded up there. Joe Walsh recorded up there. And before we get farther, let's talk about this album. So 1973, there it is. The smoker you get, the player you get. The smoker you drink, the player you get. I could never remember the title of that. This is one of these funky top-loading gatefold, so you never know what's what and what's up. There's Joe there and the rest of Barnstorm. They had taken on a fourth player, keyboard player, for this album. Honestly, I'm forgetting the guy's name. Rocco Grace. This album is most famous for Rocky Mountain Way. It's the lead song on side one. It is an amazing Joe Walsh, epic, classic rock song. Everything from the talking box to amazing guitar solos from Joe Walsh. Lots of layers, lots of stops and starts. Really good drumming by Vitale on that song as well. The rest of the album is really, really interesting. It's not your typical Joe Walsh album where if you leave Joe alone to his devices, he can kind of geek out and nerd out with different song structures and things. But with the influence of Vitale and Passarelli on here, they each have songs of their own that they sing lead on. And the second song is actually Bookends by Vitale. Vitale has some interesting, the guy's pretty talented, so he has some really interesting synthesizer and keyboards going on in different songs on the album. Almost giving this thing, a couple songs have got a progressive psych feel to them. And then Passarelli has got like a late 60s power pop sensibility that he adds to some of these songs. He's a rock solid bass player as well. Happy Ways is that Kenny Passarelli song, track 5 on side 1. This was produced by Bill Smizek. Right. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Smizek did a ton of work with Joe Walsh. He also, of course, worked with the Eagles, other people as well. Jay Ferguson comes to mind. But anyway, that is the 1973 album, The Smoker You Drink, The Player You Get, credited as Joe Walsh, but this is actually Joe Walsh along with Barnstorm. Mastered by Lee Hulko. So I'm 3 albums into this, and you're already noticing, I hope, there's no real out of left field choices here. These are all bread and butter, standard, iconic rock and roll albums from the 1970s. And that just kind of shows you the stature that Lee Hulko had. He was one of the go-to names as far as mastering was concerned, especially during the 1970s. So the next album I'm going to show was released in 1974. This was the 3rd album from this band with different players and personalities that had kind of found themselves in the Los Angeles area. They were backing up Linda Ronstadt for a while. Everybody knows who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Eagles, On the Border, that 1974 album. This is kind of a turning point for the Eagles. Glenn Frey was tired of kind of being pigeonholed as a country rock band. Maybe to the consternation of Bernie Layden. You know, Bernie Layden, he was in the Flying Burrito Brothers for a spell. And country rock is Bernie Layden's, it's in his blood, right? That might spell a little bit of what happened, you know, with Bernie eventually leaving the band. He clashed with Glenn Frey, as did other members of the Eagles through the years. So back to the story here. So the Eagles set out to record this album. They went to London. They were going to work with Glyn Johns again. And 6 weeks later, Frey and Glyn Johns, too much friction, pulled the plug on the project, said, we're going back to LA. We're gonna rethink this and find a different producer. They had already cut several songs. Only 2 of the songs that were produced by Glyn Johns actually made the final cut on the album, and that is You Never Cry Like a Lover and that monster hit, The Best of My Love. So in LA, the Eagles, mainly Glenn Frey and Don Henley, started thinking, who are we going to get to produce this? We want to have a little more of a hard-edge rock sound. They actually really liked that previous album, The Smoker You Get, The Player You Are. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, the Joe Walsh album I just showed. And they were impressed with Bill Smizek's production on that album, for sure. So, also in talking to Irving Azoff managed Joe Walsh at the time, and he also managed the Eagles. And Irving suggested, well, why don't you guys give Bill Smizek a shot? So that's exactly what they did. And in the recording of the album, there is a song called Good Day in Hell. And Glenn Frey wanted some nasty slide guitar on that song. And he went out after Bernie Layden had suggested this guy and talked to Don Felder. So Don Felder came in and was only on 2 songs on the album, but he impressed Glenn Frey and Henley so much that they invited him to join the band. That's Eagles on the Border. I have an early U.S. press with that textured kind of rough cover. The Eagles at that point in time were Glenn Frey, Don Henley, Bernie Leadon, Randy Meisner, of course, on bass, and credited as a late arrival, Don Felder on electric guitar. Don Felder, of course, would famously be booted out of the Eagles after that 1994 Hell Freezes Over tour, and he didn't make it onto the further steps that the Eagles took. Everybody knows that Don Henley and Glenn Frey were basically, it's their way or the highway as far as the Eagles were concerned in those days. So the last album I'm going to show today is a 1976 Rolling Stones album. The Rolling Stones were in transition in 1975, 1976. Mick Taylor was leaving the group, which left an opening. The Stones needed a lead and rhythm guitar player to augment Keith Richards, of course. And in the 1976 album, we have a bit of a mishmash of guitar players involved on this album. So Black and Blue basically was used as a tryout album for three different guitarists, three main guitarists that I'm going to talk about. Of course, Ronnie Wood from The Faces was joining and pitching in on some songs. An American guitarist, Wayne Perkins, was on this, several songs on this album. Most notably, he's got an incredible solo on the second song on side one after Hot Stuff, and that's Hand of Fate. It's an incredible, great Rolling Stones song. And I'm going to digress a little bit. You know, in my previous Bob Ludwig video, I talked about Tattoo You, the 1981 Stones album, and Worried About You. First song on side two was a leftover from the recording sessions, and that also features an amazing Wayne Perkins guitar solo in the middle of that song. So check that out if you haven't heard that before. The other guitar player on this album is Harvey Mandel. He's on several tracks as well. And Wayne Perkins kind of switched off between lead guitar and acoustic. Keith, of course, had a couple lead guitar instances on this album as well. Of course, the Stones had two of their favorite sidemen on this album. Also, Nicky Hopkins on keyboards, Billy Preston on electric piano and organ. A little bit of synthesizer as well was on this album. So this is known for, you know, Black and Blue. What's it known for? It's known for Hot Stuff. Hand of Fate is a great song, just mentioned it. Memory Motel was written out on Long Island, actually at Andy Warhol's kind of compound that he had. Keith and Mick were hanging out there during a break in their 1975 tour and wrote that song there. It's actually based on, I don't know if it's still there, but I think it might be the Memory Motel. I think it's near Montauk, New York. The standout song on this is a song that actually went to #1 in the United States, Fool to Cry. That is on side 2. And, you know, kind of an overlooked Rolling Stones album. Again, it's an album, kind of a transitional album. I read that cover art and the gatefold, the guys actually flew to Sanibel Island and had these photos taken on Sanibel Island. It's on that really cool Rolling Stones Records label. And this is a Lee Hulko cut. This is the one that you want if you want the best sounding pressing of Black and Blue. You want to find the Lee Hulko cut with the Sterling and the LH in the dead wax. That's number 8. 8 mastering engineers now that I've featured. Lee Hulko, co-founder of Sterling Sound, pivotal guy in the history of rock and roll, really good mastering engineer, and a very good person who recognized talent when he saw it. Like I said earlier, brought in Bob Ludwig very, very early days after he had co-formed Sterling Sound in New York. Eventually brought in George Marino as well. Hope everybody enjoyed this one. If you liked the video, I would love it to see you subscribe, and I will see you on my next video, most likely this weekend. Have a great day.